And then, CS, a big one too, is like you're working with active customers. There's product releases that are coming out. You're talking to them every week. If you're not in the know, if you're not enabled, you're not in a position to provide the information to adopt that new feature. So in the actual field, that's how this stuff trickles down. And it's really hard to get reporting on all of this.
Welcome to the Lean Scale podcast, where we talk about everything RevOps. Thank you for listening.
So something that I think is really rare, and I'd say this is for a company or for an individual too, is somebody who really understands full stack RevOps. So somebody who can work across the whole spectrum. So we see a lot of people who are good at sales ops and marketing ops and CS ops, but really tying the full thing together is pretty hard. So I like the framework that you have for the RevOps matrix that I think would be really interesting. So what does full stack RevOps mean to you?
I think we've talked about this before, but a lot of people mix sales ops with RevOps. And I think the reality is RevOps is across your sales, marketing, CS, partnerships, and then there's also multiple functions below. So planning, people, processes, enablement, tools, reporting. So it's kind of, when you look at it, it's like 4 departments and then like 6 competencies.
I feel like normally somebody's just good at like one department, or maybe they grew up there like, hey, I used to do sales, now I'm doing ops. So When I think of ops, I do sales ops.
Yeah, which makes sense. Because if you think about like your growth model, it's really heavily fixated on bookings. And the reality is a lot of that directly ties to the sales team. So I get why it happens. And I think there's just generally a lot of focus there in marketing, but it really is across CS, it's across partnerships. And then it also does extend a lot. Your planning process, all of the stuff that goes into your growth model, your sales capacity plan, your budgeting, all of that. And then you've got people. Who are you bringing in? How quickly are they ramping? What's the onboarding process look like? Process, all of the stuff that all the handoffs that have to happen, the playbooks that you're running. Enablement, which is making sure that everyone's successful and making sure that they have all of the context, especially as the product evolves, as the market evolves, making sure that that's all really easy access for the team. And then the tooling, like the infrastructure, and that gets really complicated too, because there's people that don't have experience across tools. Like, for example, CRMs, that you've been on Salesforce forever, or, now are using HubSpot. There's so many new tools that are coming to market to help with performance, to help, all of the AI tools that are coming out. And then I think one of the parts that we talk a lot about is the reporting and driving insights. So you're constantly improving this. So someone who has that context is really rare. A lot of this stuff is really new. So
I found it very hard to find really anyone who is fully competent across all of those aspects, because you can have, like, to think that you're going to be an expert in sales, an expert in marketing, an expert in CS, an expert in partnerships. Oh, and by the way, you know how to use the tools, you know how to instrument all the reporting, and you're really good at enabling everybody.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist.
Right.
And I actually get a little heated about it, because I think people will hire in somebody into an ops role and expect that. They'll say, oh, well, I have a RevOps person, so all of this should be done across 4 departments, across how many? 5, 6 functions. And why can't this one person just do it?
Right.
And I think it completely sets them up for failure.
Yeah. Yeah. Because like people in RevOps, sales ops, it's kind of complicated to articulate it. And then that's not the biggest problem. It's people that aren't in it to understand that, especially like founders or executives, they may not have the understanding of how important all of those things are. And it's tough if you haven't done those roles too. I think if you've seen that, it's really helpful, especially if you've been an individual contributor on the marketing side or the sales side. If you've had to go through and mess with tools and spend your whole day uploading lists and all of the inefficiencies, winging it because you don't have the enablement, that type of stuff becomes, you understand the impact if you've gone through it. But again, you're trying to communicate this, and if revenue ops owns the plan, it's hard to explain and hire the right person in, especially if it's the first person on that team. So yeah, it's a complicated thing that I think just finally got to a point where you can sort of articulate how it looks in some matrix like this.
Yeah. And I think something you've talked about, I know we've talked about it before, is you have a technical founder. Usually for a lot of these companies that implement a RevOps team, it's usually a software type of company. So the founder is usually technical.
Right.
Didn't come up through a go-to-market function. And I think the appreciation for the complexities of the go-to-market engine is really lacking. And I wouldn't say it's their fault. Like, why would you expect somebody to think that? But they just haven't had the experience, and it seems easy.
Right.
Because a lot of people would think, how hard is it to get a CRM in? And once you have Salesforce, it should be able to do all the things that you need to do. Like, you don't buy Zoom and then need someone to manage it and architect it. Like, you buy most tools and they just do the thing that you need to work.
Right.
But I really feel like that's a huge gap to understand really how complex it is on the RevOps side. And I think it's something that's hard to bridge.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good point. Cause like a real life example for these departments, let's say sales is one example. Let's say you're an SDR, you're sending people emails to generate interest in your product. There's a difference between having a one-click button to add the right types of people to an email campaign, and then clicking another few buttons and editing a few things and then sending that out, versus having to go pull all of that information to a sheet, import it, make sure it's all mapped correctly to your CRM, map it to the new tool that you're using for your outreach. It's like a night and day difference for an individual rep, and then all the reporting that trickles down. If the SDR manager is getting asked, what's the performance of these campaigns? What are the reply rates? What's working well? That's stuff that is, you can't answer those questions. Marketing, same thing with attribution. That's like a really big issue. And the amount of tooling that goes into it, the thought, the process, they may not have the answers that seem obvious to someone who's asking these questions. Like, what's the conversion rates for these? What actually converted this customer to buy the product? That requires all the things that we talked about to really understand. Partnerships, another one, is like handoffs. Who owns it? Is it a CS? Does the CS team own this? How does it go through the sales process? Should it go through a sales process? How do you enable them? And then, CS, a big one too, is like you're working with active customers. There's product releases that are coming out. You're talking to them every week. If you're not in the know, if you're not enabled, you're not in a position to provide the information to adopt that new feature. So in the actual field, that's how this stuff trickles down, and it's really hard to get reporting on all of this. And usually you're going in as a leader of one of these teams and you may not have the answers, and it's hard to say, well, we need more tooling and process. Once it's at that point, you have to be really proactive on this and share why you're doing it ahead of time and the importance of that stuff, so that you don't get caught in a position where you can't answer questions that seem obvious for someone who may not be in that department. So yeah.
Yeah, I think one that might highlight a lot is, let's take conversion rate. And it's usually something that people want to know. So if you're like, okay, what is my opportunity to close conversion rate? That seems so easy. Like, why wouldn't you just say how many opportunities we had, how many closed, do some division, it's simple math, and then give me the answer? Well, you have a systems component to it. So do we have a system in place that is tracking the movements appropriately and time stamping when things are happening? And do we have that automated, so we're not counting on the team to just enter in that data? And then, is the team enabled on exactly when to open up an opportunity? Do we have really clear process definitions on what an opportunity is and when it should be open and when it should move to the next stage? Then do we have the right levels of management that are ensuring that it's happening that way? And then do you have the right reporting to be able to say, here's the closed one, and then over when you had opportunities, and then do it in the right time series too. Like, something that sounds so seemingly simple just gets really, really tough to do.
Yeah.
And if you're not going across that matrix like you've talked about, saying, okay, do you have your sales ops in order? Do you have your marketing ops in order? Your CS ops in order? And then really tight on all the functions that RevOps needs to serve. That one simple thing, if one of those is off, you're not going to be able to answer that question.
Yep, 100%. So you have to build a team to be able to execute on all of that. And I guess a question for you, you've led these teams, like how do you think about the skill set? Because you mentioned tooling, and I think stuff like the timestamps, that's not like out of the box for even things like Salesforce, and being able to think through that. So how do you kind of think about the tool and or the talent profile for building out the team?
That's a good question. And usually, like, especially if you're early, you have budget for one person. So where do you want to index that talent? I think in general, there's two general profiles. You have, I'm the business process, business analyst type of profile. So you're interested in the structure and what to do, how to do it. You're interested in tracking things to goal and the reporting. And then you have the technical person who can go in and make sure all of the tools work. And I think those are the two general profiles. Then within those profiles, and if you can get that team at the beginning, I think you're going to be in pretty good shape. You're going to cover most of the matrix. So like, okay, I'm going to have the process, I'm going to have systems and tooling, I'm going to have reporting. The process person should be able to provide some level of enablement. So you should be relatively covered. Then within those roles, then it's, well, what functional expertise do you have? Are you more familiar with sales? Are you more familiar with marketing? Are you more familiar with customer success? I mean, my personal background, I came up through customer success. So I was a CSM, I led a team of CSMs, I became a VP of customer success, and then I moved into RevOps after that. So my orientation on RevOps was really heavy on CS, and I knew that part of the business really well. And probably my weaker aspect is further up the funnel with marketing. It's pretty good with sales, but the marketing part was a little bit weak on my side. So even if you have those profiles, then you have to think, okay, which business functions do I have covered with that team too?
Yep. And did you tap into other people for things like enablement? That one's like a tricky one too, especially as you're building a new team. So how do you think about working with other functions to fill those gaps? Like, did you do that, or was it something that you kind of just built over time?
No, I had to. I mean, my personal story, just having a gap on marketing, I had to work really close with the head of marketing in my first RevOps role. And they really helped me out a lot. I could use them for enablement. I could use them for, hey, what's the right reporting to be looking at? What's the cadence of this? What processes should we be following? Can you help me document this type of stuff? So I think you definitely have to coordinate when you're at that level. Now, at a bigger company, I'm talking like couple hundred million in revenue type of company. At that point, you should have some specialists in the function. So that process person, but for sales, for CS, for marketing, partnerships if it's a big part of your strategy. So earlier, you kind of have to say, okay, well, I personally cover these parts of that matrix. I know CS, I'm pretty good at sales. I can do the process and reporting. I'm going to need to fill the gap on marketing.
Right.
And as you get big enough, then it starts to become, financially feasible to say, hey, we need to have good health in each one of these areas in the matrix. Like, we have to be able to fill in these gaps with real dedicated expertise. And so when you're at that point, it makes sense to make the investment.
Makes sense. And it's hard to do that because what's good is really dependent on a lot of things. It's like your stage, your strategy, maybe partnerships isn't part of it, but it's hard to adjust that over time, because what you were doing at maybe a Series B level or even a Series A level, that level isn't good enough when you're at like a Series C or, you know, in the hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. So I think that's another part, is like it's constantly, the stakes are getting higher, the tooling's getting more complex. You have to scale as the company scales. So there's never really a time where it's done.
Oh, never. It just gets harder.
Right.
It gets harder. And I think that's something that people they don't realize, or they don't think about, or they don't want to think about it. I think a lot of people have in their head, cool, I'm going to instrument Salesforce. I'm going to get the marketing automation in, a CS platform, and I'm done. Now we're ready for scale. Not even close. That's your ticket just to begin scaling. You haven't started the process of scaling. Now you're just enabled to maybe scale. And every step of the way, it gets harder and harder and harder. And it gets more detailed and more nuanced. And the tooling gets more complex, but also just the sheer number of tools that you need to bring on to scale properly. It gets beyond what one person can really know.
Right. Right. And I think, yeah, that's a good point. It's not like there is a profile that completely fits in this. So you have to kind of think about, where do we need to focus? What areas am I good at? You kind of have to always be paying attention to that. And one that I feel like gets overlooked a lot is the people, the hiring. Because really, you're building a plan, and a big part of the plan is the people to be able to execute these things. And oftentimes, if the process isn't good, the tools aren't good, the reporting isn't good, if you get really good people, they're going to figure it out. You know, I think they provide a leeway. But the tricky part is it's sometimes not a proactive, you know, trying to make sure that you can sell really top talent on why what the company is doing is really good. Because the recruiting team is an extension of the sales team and the marketing team. I mean, there's like a whole approach there where if you could double down and work closely with recruiting and get really top talent, understand the profile that sells well, you know, that's another way to kind of hack the system, where if you just have killer people across the company, you know, some of this stuff doesn't need to be completely dialed in. And the opposite's true if you are a little bit more passive on candidates and you don't know the exact profile. You have to have everything laid out so that it's really simple for everyone to follow. Otherwise, no one's going to hit their number. So that's just another thing that personally I wish I doubled down on more earlier. And it's something that you can do as long as you know the product and why people like working there. You don't need to be a complete expert in every single department to be able to nail something like that.
No, and it doesn't have to be fully 1,000% operationalized.
Right.
Like if you get good people, I totally agree with you. They figure it out. They fill in the gaps. Like, okay, this quoting process isn't totally fleshed out, but I understand the business objectives. I understand what we're trying to go for. I'm not going to send out a quote that's stupid. And I'm going to go to the people who I need to go to get approvals, and I'll figure it out. You know, I'm a big fan of Good to Great. I've probably read it, 5-6 times just because I like going back and applying it to what I'm doing right now. And a big part of it is get the right people on the bus, get the wrong people off the bus as fast as you can. Because even if you operationalize it for them, it doesn't matter. You can make it as easy as possible. If you have the wrong person there, they're not going to be successful. And then within the bus, get the right people in the right seats. So hey, culture fit, right, soft skills, transferable skills, great. Okay, now let's get them in a role where they can be successful.
Yeah.
And tying this back to the matrix, I think, full stack RevOps, it's frankly a myth. I firmly believe there's not a single person out there who is an expert level in every aspect of RevOps. So to get full stack RevOps, you really need to build a team, collaborate with people, use partners in order to fill in the gaps that you have, and really orchestrate a whole business function that can meet all of the needs, rather than thinking, oh, I'm going to go get this one person. And, keep me honest, but if you're a technical developer or a technical founder, the same would be true on the technical side, on the product side, engineering side. Like, yeah, there are full stack developers who are pretty good at a few things, but there comes a point in time where you need a specialist on something to build something right and to build something at scale.
100%. Yeah. And I think that changes too over time. The bigger you get, the more specialized you have to get. The talent shifts. You have to get people in maybe different seats that were good. But yeah, it's the same concept. It's the same concept.
So what should we tell people listening? Like if you have no RevOps, what should we be doing right now? And then at different levels of scale, like what should people be looking for?
Yeah, I think the first step is, it's kind of hard to say because it does depend on the scale. But let's say you're just early stage company, you're just kind of starting this up, maybe have like a couple of salespeople. I think there's a lot of the time those companies build on SMB focused CRMs, which, like the small business CRMs that may not,
like a Pipedrive, Copper.
Pipedrive, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
They're perfect examples. So like those are cheaper. They're not, you don't have to build everything out of the box. It's just like a simple way to scale. So I think a lot of the stuff that is done in RevOps is focused on the CRM. So I would just kind of make sure that you have the right CRM for your stage as you get investors, and you have board meetings. And if that's a new muscle, like you need to make sure the reporting is, comprehensive enough to be able to answer questions. Because a lot of RevOps is just, are you able to answer questions and make decisions? You're doing all this to be able to make the right decision. So I'd say take a look at your tooling, CRM. I'd keep it light. Like I wouldn't go crazy on a bunch of tools. I would just really make sure that you're focused on the right things. Keep the CRM fields short. You don't need a ton of stuff in there to start. It's just really making sure that that's a place that you're now focusing a lot of energy. I think, outside of as you scale, it kind of changes. I think a lot of it, the tricky part is having the right visibility into the numbers, into the business, and knowing what to track. So it's important to define what the North Star metrics are, what they mean, and understand what implications or tactics you should do if something's up or down. What happens if you're marketing, you're not building enough pipeline? Where are you looking next?
Yeah, what play are you going to run?
Exactly. How does that matter per channel? And I'd say keep things simple to start. I think a lot of teams come in and they want to do, for the marketing example, they want to test like 20 channels, and it just gets really complicated. All of these, to make improvements over time, you have to focus a lot of energy. It's easy to maybe kick something off, but it's hard to refine it. So, I think the next part is visibility. That goes back to your CRM. Do you have that data? If you don't have a CRM, you should do it in sheets. I don't know if there's really ever an excuse for it. Whatever you're doing, you can have enough data of like,
I say don't buy anything until the tool you're using like physically can't do it.
Right.
I think we work with a lot of companies that are like, oh, we got to be in Salesforce. We're on HubSpot. We're on Pipedrive. And like, what can't you do?
Right.
Are you not able to pull a report? Do you need some custom functionality? And I think there's just this idea of like, oh no, we need to just be on the best in class tools. No, you need to be on best fit tools.
Yes.
What's good for you at the stage you're at.
Right. Exactly. I think it's a good point. That's why there's so many CRMs. They're fitting for size of companies or specific industries or markets. Like it's important to just understand your size and understand what you need to put into place. You don't need CPQ when you have 3 salespeople.
Right.
You don't need a health tool to track customer engagement and all of that when you have 1 CSM. I think that's the type of stuff that you just need to think what makes the most sense. And if it's a core part of your strategy, this advice is bad. But like, I think, generally like there's, you should just understand the tooling landscape and make sure you have visibility on the data. I think over time, it's just like, how are you tracking this? Is it updated? And do you know what decisions to make from the data? I think so many people frantically pull together reports and dashboards, and then there's not this moment of like, okay, here's the next step we should do. Like, now that we have this, here's the next step, and here's the tactic, here's the play we need to run. Sometimes it's just like frantically trying to get the data so that we even know. And my suggestion would be for anyone who presents this type of data in a revenue ops role, or honestly anyone presenting go-to-market data, is have that conversation with yourself before presenting it to people. You don't want someone to look at the data, ask you, okay, what are you doing about it? And we haven't gotten to that point. We haven't thought through it. It's just not useful, if you're just focused on pulling reports. You have to have some decisions being made, and they have to all be backed with the data. The data is helping you make good decisions. So just make sure that you're coming in with some decisions or options versus just showing all the data to the team.
I worked with a CRO who used to say the thing that he hated the most were what he called curiosity KPIs. Like just measuring things just because you're kind of interested in what it might be.
Right.
And you can go down such a rabbit hole of just like measuring nonsense when, to your point, it's measure what matters to make decisions you need to make. And the whole thing is about allocating your investment. Do we need to hire more salespeople? Do we need to put more into a particular marketing channel? Are we closing a lot of business and we need to bring on more CSMs? And how can we enable the whole go-to-market function with partnerships and ops? Like, you're not doing it just for the academic exercise of showing off how many reports you can do. So any report that you pull should say, okay, because of this, we need to do that.
Yep, 100%. And we need to build X in the product. I mean, a lot of the time you're building for someone, and the go-to-market helps validate the ones you can close now, but it also tells you what gaps you have. So you need to know what that is so that you can go capture the market that you built your product for over time. So that feedback loop's really important for these teams. It can't just live with a go-to-market team. Once you get to that point, it always has to be shared back so that you're building for those customers next year.
Yep, absolutely. So I think to wrap it up, full stack RevOps, if you think of it as a single person, it just doesn't exist. So I wouldn't think of hiring one person and you have RevOps solved. Full stack RevOps requires a team, and what it is expertise across the entire go-to-market functions, sales, marketing, CS, partnerships, and then the functions of RevOps. So process, people, enablement, tools and systems, reporting, analytics, insights. And you need to get the right people with the right skill sets and collaborate across the right access of people as well in order to really pull it off. That's what a full RevOps function should be serving your business, but it does take a lot of coordination and a lot of skill sets to pull it off right. It's something I know you and I have both struggled with and built as heads of ops as companies before. And it's something that we're working to solve every single day now. And the last thing to highlight, the job is never done. And it's only going to get harder. So don't expect to set a foundation and forget it. It's just going to get more complex as you scale, which is a good thing. You want to be growing your business anyway. So,
exactly.
So yeah, I think that's just some perspective I hope some founders have, some people starting off in RevOps have, and take a look at the skill sets that you have on your team and figure out where you need to fill the gaps.
100%. And if you don't have those, find other people to fill those gaps.
Absolutely. Joe, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you liked the discussion, please like, share, and subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss a new episode.